Welcome back. This second video, building off of our first video, which talked about how to introduce textual evidence with signal phrases, and we have some examples here that we're going to amend for the new format. This video is going to focus on how to use colons to introduce textual evidence. First off, let me just advocate for why this is such a critical skill, not just for students to learn, but for teachers to build at a younger age than we probably do in terms of a skill in their repertoire. One, it is a much more professional, controlled, and intentional way to introduce evidence. Two, it flexes a much higher grammatical skill in terms of being able to use and understand colons, which has lots of utility, especially when we're thinking not just about ACT prep and SAT prep, but also becoming a flexible, versatile writer. I just think that we need to introduce the use of colons at a much earlier age than we do in our typical curricula, and let this be my soapbox. That being the case, let's get to work. Let's just take a look at our format. So the biggest thing, obviously, when we're using colon introductions for textual evidence is let's make sure we know what a colon is. So the colon is those two dots. So often I have students pulling off one of these guys. So make sure you're not using a semicolon. Make sure you're actually using a colon when you use this form of textual evidence. That's the second thing that goes in the formula. This part right here, and this is really where the skill comes down to, has to be an independent clause because it has to follow the rules of a colon, which means that what comes before the colon has to introduce what comes after, and the part that goes before the colon has to stand by itself in terms of being independent. So we've got our subject, we've got the linking verb right here with was, so independent clause. And I'm going to even use the phrase introducing, introductory, because whatever comes before has to be related to the evidence that comes after. Then you've got your textual evidence again, and you've got your citation. So this is the exact same from the previous video where we have the direct evidence taken from the text. You've got quotation marks around it. You have your citation with author's last name and page number, and you have your period. So let's just look at how this looks in comparison. So last time, oops, let me undo that. I had this text according to the article, and then I had the textual evidence. Here was my signal phrase right here. Here's my author's last name, and here's my page number. However, using the same evidence with a different skill, I'm going to try doing this with a colon. So let's just take my pre-written text and let's turn it to black. So John Hamm's first role was traumatic. I have described the evidence before I've introduced it and then used a colon. This is incredibly powerful because it allows you, the writer, to frame how your reader deals with the evidence. You have already told the reader that this role was traumatic, and then you've provided evidence for this. You have framed the way the evidence is going to be received. That is why this is a higher level form of writing, in my opinion, and such a critical skill to develop. So, building off of that, let's go up to our samples from last time. So we had two uses of textual evidence. I'm going to get rid of the gold because it's going to get in the way if I don't. So this first one right here, I had the article observes. Here's my signal phrase observes. I had my comma, and then I had my textual evidence. Now here's the thing that you'll find if you're trying to diversify writing that already has textual evidence with signal phrases. Oftentimes the sentence that came before did introduce it. Not all NFL stars were selected in the first round of the NFL draft. Then it gives me textual evidence. That introduces it. So an easy fix, I'm just going to get rid of this, turn into a colon, and now everything else works because this stands by itself as an independent clause. I've got a colon here that introduces the textual evidence. I've got the author's last name and page number. So let's try another one from scratch though, just so we can work through that skill. So let's say we wanted to do this right here. And instead of saying this shows in terms of describing the evidence afterwards, as we often do with signal phrases, let's describe it first off. So let's say in Krug's article, since she observes how Urschel had both athletic and academic interests. So I've got a complete sentence. I now have a colon right here. I didn't use a semicolon. And then I can toss in my textual evidence like this. I obviously need to fix the bold part. There we go. And then now the only thing here, instead of doing Krug 1, since I've already said the author's name right here, I can just do page 1, period out there. His dueling interests. Now, why I wanted to add this is that this allows you to get away from that format of claim, evidence, analysis. I've already given some of my analysis here, so now I can really go to a deeper level of analysis. So what I've seen as a teacher of English for many years now is that students who use colons are quicker to get to the deeper levels without skipping steps. It just allows them to do more in terms of their thinking and their analysis. Sometimes they're repetitive, and that's something to avoid. Like you wouldn't want to say, this shows how Urschel had two different interests. This would be a bad form of analysis, but I don't want to get distracted in the purpose of this video. You want to let this be a jumping board to go even deeper, or I should say a diving board, to use the metaphor correctly. So that being the case, the ways that I see this misused, the biggest is I see things like this. So I'll use the dependent clause that you want to avoid. You got to make sure it's independent clause. I already told you that I see semicolons sometimes. Sometimes I see the comma, so people just do an independent clause and then a comma in textual evidence. That's something to avoid, because if it's an independent clause, use the colon. If you want to use a comma, you got to do the full signal phrase. Okay? And then the other thing to avoid is doing the straight signal phrase with the colon. So the article argues, colon. I see this a lot in student writing. Make sure that if you're using a colon, it has to follow the two rules. Did it introduce, and was it an independent clause? So that is our overview of how to use a colon to introduce textual evidence. We have one more video coming, and as always, feel free to reach out to me with additional questions, and have a great